The rifle shot cracked across the valley like thunder, and Naomi Hargrave didn't flinch. She stood on the porch of the burned-out cabin, her back straight as iron, her gray-streaked hair escaping a loose braid, and watched the massive man reload without a word. He'd just put a bullet through the "No trespassing" sign her dead husband's creditors had nailed to the gate. "You planning to shoot them too?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fact that she hadn't eaten in 2 days. The mountain man looked at her with eyes the color of winter sky. "Only if they come back uninvited." That was 4 hours ago. Now the question was whether she'd let him stay. Rewind 2 weeks. Naomi had turned 43 the day they came to take the house. She didn't celebrate. She stood in the doorway of the only home she'd known for 20 years and watched 3 men in dark suits inventory everything she owned like she was already dead. "Mrs. Hargrave," the lead banker said, not meeting her eyes, "your husband's debts exceed the value of the property. The bank is prepared to offer you 30 days to vacate and a reference for employment in town if you employment." The word tasted like ash. She was a woman alone in 1889 Montana territory, too old to be marriageable, too educated to be trusted in polite society, too proud to beg. Doing what exactly? The banker coughed. "The hotel needs laundry staff." She'd closed the door in his face. Not slammed it. That would have been undignified. Just closed it, quietly, the way you close a coffin. Her husband had been dead 6 months. Thomas Hargrave, respected surveyor, beloved liar. She found the gambling ledgers after the funeral, hidden in the false bottom of his desk. Years of losses. Debts to men in Denver, Cheyenne, San Francisco. He'd mortgaged the land 3 times over and smiled at her every morning like nothing was wrong. She'd loved him once. Now she just felt tired. The cabin sat in a valley beneath the Tobacco Root Mountains, 10 miles from the nearest town. Good water, timber, a barn Thomas had built with his own hands before the cards got him. Naomi had a milk cow, 2 dozen chickens, and a garden she'd coaxed from rocky soil through sheer stubbornness. It wasn't much, but it was hers. Where it had been. She had no family. Her parents were long dead. Her only sister married to a preacher in Ohio who'd made it clear Naomi's presence would be an embarrassment. No children. That particular sorrow had carved itself deep over the years, another thing Thomas had promised and failed to deliver. The town of Richfield considered her an oddity. She read Greek, kept her own books, and had once publicly corrected the territorial judge on a point of contract law. Women didn't do that. Women especially didn't do that at 43, alone, with gray in their hair and no prospects. Too old, too proud, too broken, she'd heard Martha Yates whisper at the mercantile. No man's going to take that on. Naomi had bought her flour and left without a word. She had 2 weeks left when the mountain man arrived. She was hauling water from the creek when she saw him, a massive figure on a massive horse, leading a pack mule, moving slow up the valley road. He stopped at the gate, read the bank's "No trespassing" sign, and kept coming anyway. Naomi set down the bucket and waited. He dismounted in the yard. 6'5" if he was an inch, shoulders broad as an axe handle, chest and arms thick with the kind of muscle that came from splitting wood and hauling elk. He wore buckskin and canvas, a wide-brimmed hat shadowing a bearded face, and he moved with the economy of a man who didn't waste motion. He took off his hat. His hair was dark, shot through with silver at the temples. 40, maybe 45. His eyes were startling, pale blue, calm, direct. "Ma'am," he said. "Name's Callan Ring. I'm looking for winter ground. You're on private property. Sign says it belongs to the bank." Naomi's jaw tightened. "For 2 more weeks, it's mine." He nodded slowly, like he was weighing something. "I heard in town a woman up here was losing her land. Heard she was stubborn, smart, and didn't suffer fools. And that brought you here. Why? Because I need a winter camp, and you need help." He gestured toward the sagging barn, the broken fence line, the wood pile that wouldn't last a month. "I'm offering a trade. I don't take charity. Didn't offer charity. Offered a trade." His voice was low, even. No performance in it. "I work the land, fix what needs fixing, hunt for the table. You let me camp here through winter. Come spring, we figure out what's next. The bank won't come back if they think a man's living here." Naomi stared at him. "You don't know me." "No, ma'am. I'm not young. I'm not easy. And I'm—" She stopped herself. "Proud," Callan finished quietly. "I know. That's why I came. The first week, They barely spoke. Callan set up camp in the barn, refused the house outright, said it wasn't proper, and went to work like a man possessed. He repaired the fence, reinforced the barn roof, split a month's worth of wood before breakfast. He moved through the work with a quiet intensity, and Naomi caught herself watching him from the kitchen window more than once. The muscle of his bare back in the cold morning air. The way he gentled the cow when she balked. The sheer, solid presence of him. She hated that she noticed. On the 8th day, the banker returned. He brought the sheriff. Naomi met them at the gate. Callan appeared from the tree line with a rifle in the crook of his arm, a brace of rabbits over his shoulder, looking every inch the dangerous man the town believed him to be. Mrs. Hargrave, the banker started, "We weren't aware you'd taken in my business partner," Naomi said crisply. "Mr. Rain and I have entered into a joint venture on this property." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "What kind of venture?" "The kind that's none of your concern unless you have a legal writ." Callan said nothing, just stood there, 7 feet of silent threat. The banker cleared his throat. "The debt is being addressed," Naomi interrupted. "You'll have payment in full by spring." It was a bluff. A desperate, impossible bluff. She had $40 to her name. The banker looked at Callan. Callan looked back, unblinking. "Spring," the banker finally said. Not a day later. When they left, Naomi's hands were shaking. She turned to Callan, words of explanation ready. But he just nodded once and walked back to the barn. That night, she brought him supper, venison stew, cornbread, coffee. He'd cleaned the barn, built himself a neat corner with a bedroll and a small stove. Books lined a makeshift shelf. Real books. Virgil. Whitman. A worn copy of Leaves of Grass. "You read?" she said, surprised. "Yes, ma'am." He took the plate. "Thank you." She should have left. Instead, she sat on an upturned crate. "Why are you really here, Mr. Rain?" He was quiet for a long moment, chewing carefully. Then, "I spent 15 years alone in the high timber. Trading, trapping, guiding hunters. Made good money. Saved most of it. And one day I realized I hadn't spoken to another soul in 6 months and didn't miss it." He looked at her. "That's when I knew I was disappearing. So you came down." "I came looking for a reason to stay down." He set the plate aside. "Town said you were impossible. I figured impossible might be worth knowing." Something in her chest cracked open, just a sliver. "I can't pay you," she said quietly. "I can't pay the bank. I lied to them." "I know." "Then why?" "Because you didn't flinch when I showed up armed. Because you stood down a sheriff without breaking a sweat. Because you're fighting for something that matters." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I've got money, Mrs. Hargrave. Enough to settle your debt 3 times over. But I won't insult you by offering it." Her throat tightened. "Then what are you offering?" "Partnership. Real one. You've got land, skill, and a spine made of iron. I've got capital and 2 strong hands. We build something here that's ours, equal terms. People will talk. Let them. I'm not." She hesitated, hating the vulnerability. "I'm not a young woman, Mr. Rain." His eyes held hers, steady and sure. "I'm not a young man. And I'm not interested in young. I'm interested in strong." The barn was very quiet. Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall, soft and silent against the roof. They married in March, standing in front of a bewildered judge in Ridgefield with 2 witnesses pulled from the street. Callan paid the bank in full that afternoon. Cash, counted out in crisp bills that made the banker's hands tremble. The look on the man's face when Naomi signed the discharge papers as Mrs. Naomi Rain was worth every hard year she'd survived. But the wedding was strategy. The marriage became something else entirely. Callan kept his word. Equal partnership meant equal say. When they expanded the herd, he asked her opinion on breeding stock. When she wanted to start a small trade in medicinal herbs, he built her a drying shed without question. They worked side by side from dawn to dusk, and slowly, the silence between them shifted from careful distance to comfortable companionship. He told her about the high country, about winters so cold your breath froze in your beard, about the particular loneliness of beauty no one else sees. She told him about Thomas, about the years of small deceptions, about the grief of childlessness and the shame of being pitted. "You're not pitiable," Callan said one night, sitting across from her at the kitchen table. "You're formidable." Spring became summer. The valley bloomed. And one evening in late July, as they sat on the porch watching the sun paint the mountains gold, Callan reached across the space between their chairs and took her hand. His palm was rough, warm, scarred from a lifetime of hard use. Hers fit against it perfectly. "I know this started as business," he said quietly, "but it's not that anymore. Not for me." Naomi looked at this man who had appeared when she'd lost everything, who had never once asked her to be smaller or softer or different than she was, who read poetry in the barn and fixed her fences and stood beside her like she was worth defending. "Not for me either," she whispered. He kissed her then, gentle and sure, and she felt the last locked place in her heart finally open. They had 3 years together before the winter fever took him. 3 years of fierce partnership, quiet joy, and a love Naomi had thought herself too old and too broken to ever find. When Callan died in their bed with his hand in hers, she buried him on the hillside above the valley he'd loved, and she grieved with the whole of her formidable heart. But she didn't break. She ran the ranch alone for another 20 years, became the wealthiest landowner in the county, and when she finally passed at 66, she left everything to the church with one condition: that they use it to help women who'd been told they were too old, too proud, or too broken to start again. Because Naomi Raine knew the truth the town had never understood. Sometimes the most broken places are exactly where the strongest things grow. Sometimes the man everyone fears is the only one brave enough to see you clearly. And sometimes, right when the world says you're finished, you find the person who looks at all your sharp edges and shattered pieces and says the only word that matters: perfect.